In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. A reading from the book of Genesis, chapter 50. But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Let us pray. God our Father, we thank you for having brought us together this evening to learn the book of Genesis. As Joseph comforts his brother, saying that God will come to give us this hope that God will come to visit our life wherever we are. Bless all the brothers and sisters who are gathered here. Bless the newcomers that from different parts of the world we join together to hear your word. Being inspired by your word, we may continue to spread hope, love wherever we are. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. Good. So good evening to you, my dear brothers and sisters. Hearty welcome to you. On behalf of the chairman, His Excellency Most Reverend Dr. Anthony Sami Peter Abir, I extend to you my sincere welcome to this lecture on the book of Genesis. To begin with the practical information, this is the third lecture in the series. So the previous two lectures are available on YouTube. Those who have missed could access them. And the present video will be made available this night after editing. Then the second information, the lesson has, the series has 24 lessons. This is the third. Every last month we'll be meeting. And the ID will be the same, the Google Meet ID. So however I send it, I will send again. So you need not change the ID. So the ID is locked for all the 24 lessons. So you can log in with the same ID. That's the second information. And thirdly, we have all the assessment could be made, like those who participate in the postal course could start sending their assessment sheet, and those who are participating online also could start your assessment after studying the lesson. Good. So now to the lesson. I share my screen with you. And the first session will be for 45 minutes, that is now 4:05 till 4:50. The second will be another 45 minutes after a break of 5 minutes. Good. I hope you are able to see the screen. Yes.
Yes, Father.
Okay, good. Thank you. So the title of today's lecture is Book of Genesis. This is the third lesson in our textbook series. To begin with, name and content. The name of the book is Genesis. The Genesis is an English title. It in fact comes from the Septuagint, that is the Greek translation. But the original title in Hebrew Bible is In the Beginning. In Hebrew, it is Bereshit. So the Hebrew Bible or the Hebrew books, they have their names from the first two or first three words of the book. And the book of Genesis begins with Bereshit bara. In the beginning, God created. So from there we get the word Bereshit. So the original title in the Hebrew Bible is Bereshit. And Genesis from this, it seems from the beginning of, is how it Septuagint translates, and the same word is retained in English. This has two prime sections. Number one, primeval history, covering from chapters 1 to 11. Then second section, patriarchal history, from chapter 12 to. You look at the chapters here. about the primeval history, like in a sense from the beginning of the universe, then beginning of humankind, then the great deluge, then how we came to be. So the Bible dedicates only 11 chapters. But for three patriarchs, that is Patriarch Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, for these three persons, we have about 60 to 70% of the book of Genesis. So it means to say, like the primeval history, like it's not a history that is narrating what really happened, but it in a way sets a theological background or theological ground for what is to come. And after the primeval history, there is a sudden introduction about the person of Abraham. So we don't know really what happened after the Tower of Babel or after Noah to Abraham. So which means this no way negates that things didn't happen. Things were happening, but Abraham comes to the picture as the father of the great nation of Israel. And that is why we have that sudden transition from Noah to Abraham. And that's why the Bible dedicates very little for premillennial history and a large section for patriarchal history. The content or the theological content of the book of Genesis could be as follows. One, promise to the ancestors. So by ancestors, we mean the patriarchs, three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God promises three. Number one, offspring. Offspring are children. Number two, blessings in general. Like blessing means that they would be prosperous, the cattle will prosper, and whatever they do they will be prosperous. That is blessing. Thirdly, land. And these offspring and land, they are very important as far as the Genesis is concerned, because they make a great beginning. Like when an offspring is born, the generation continues. And when the land is given, they get rooted. And these two are already found in the primeval history. For example, Adam and Eve. So they have the offspring, Cain and Abel. And they also have land, the Garden of Eden. But what happens after the fall? They are expelled from the land. And during the fratricide, that Cain kills Abel. So already there is a tension in the beginning of the narrative or beginning of the book about this offspring and land, and will be there throughout the book. That's the first major, and it's only a promise. And this promise gets fulfilled to some extent in the book itself, but large extent in the later narratives. For example, promise of land. God promises them the land, but the land is acquired only under the leadership of Joshua, and that happens in the book of Joshua. So that way, the promise is given to Abraham, but the promise is fulfilled later. However, Abraham possesses a piece of promised land when his wife Sarah dies. So during Abraham's life, already there is a fulfillment, but the greater fulfillment happens only later. And the second theme or the second theological thread that runs through the entire Genesis is election of Israel. So God chooses the nation of Israel. And first of all, we get the name Israel from Jacob. So Jacob becomes Israel. And when Jacob becomes Israel, he becomes the firstborn of the entire nation of Israel, or he becomes the father of Israel. However, Abraham becomes father of Israel as far as faith, but the real name comes from Jacob. And this election has a motive. So in our previous lecture, we talked about younger son motive. In the First Testament or the Old Testament, and in the Second Testament or the New Testament, we have this particular theme running through that is called younger son motive. What is this younger son motive? This has a political background. Political background is this. In the time of people of Israel, there were four superpowers, super nations like Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Hittites. So when compared to these four nations or four countries, Israel was very weak. Right? God chose Israel means that God disowned all these superpowers and chose this small nation and made that nation into a great nation. And that is very well found even in all the narratives. Look at the first parent. Cain's offering is rejected. Abel's offering is accepted by God. Then later, two sons are born to Abraham, Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael is rejected, Isaac is accepted. Then coming to Isaac, Esau and Jacob are born. Esau is rejected, Jacob is accepted. And even Jacob's sons, Joseph, the one of the last ones, is accepted. The other ones, they are not rejected, but however, they are not the main line of the story. So through that, and even in the New Testament, when it comes to the parable of the prodigal son or two sons, parable of the two sons, where the younger son is accepted and the elder one, we don't know whether the elder one enters into the banquet at all. So this entire motive of election runs through the book of Genesis. The third one is covenant. Covenant, as we said earlier, covenant is a relationship that is made between God and the people of Israel. However, this covenant is a secular word. Secular word in the sense, a king goes in war against another king, the another king is defeated, and the defeated king becomes somebody who would pay tribute to the winner king. And the winner king makes a covenant with the defeated king where he promises certain rights. And in answering to those or in responding to those rights, the defeated king has to fulfill certain duties. So in a covenant, it's a relationship between a winner king and a defeated king where there are mutual rights and duties. When we apply the same to the biblical principle, the people of Israel are owned or won by God, and God gives them certain rights. And to respond to those rights, people have to also respond through their duties. That's the 10 Commandments. So this is a beginning. And Noah is made the first covenant, conditional covenant. Abraham is made unconditional covenant. So the later we'll discuss how these covenant principles are affecting the later, like New Covenant, Jeremiah, and Davidic covenant. But these two are basic covenants. Good. So these three are the key principles. Now with that, let us get into the text. So we are not going in depth to the text, but only some themes we are taking and we are trying to look at. So the first text that we are going to take is Genesis 1:1 to 2:4, where we have the first creation narrative. The first creation narrative, like already there is a first creation narrative and a second creation narrative. So some people, those who read the Bible for the first time, are confused. So what is the confusion? So in the first, according to the first creation narrative that we have in Genesis 1, God creates the human person last. But in the second creation, that is from 2:5 in Genesis, God creates human person first. So the question is like, which story is to be taken as real? Whether human person was created last or human person was created first. That would be one confusion. Second confusion would be like according to the first creation narrative, there are 6 days God works or God creates the world, and on the seventh day God is resting. But according to the second narrative, there is no division of days and there is no resting for God. So the entire focus is different. So when the scholars first identified these differences, they began to see whether Moses really wrote, means if Moses were to write the entire Genesis, why he should contradict himself. So then later they thought, they asked the question about authorship. Who really wrote the book of Genesis? And to answer this, they have more or less found out a solution that is called the book of Genesis has 4 traditions or materials from 4 traditions, and these 4 traditions they call JEBP. So J for Yahweh, like in from German scholars, so that's why. So it's Yahweh, they write Yahweh with J. That's why the Yahwist. Then Elohist, E, D for Deuteronomist, and P for priestly. It's very simple. J refers to the texts that call God as Yahweh. So wherever the Lord, the name, the Lord, that is a particular God is present, that text they named as J. It's only hypothesis. It's not proven, but it's only hypothesis. They call it documentary hypothesis. J is the text where the name of God is mentioned as Yahweh, the Lord. And E is the text where the name of God is mentioned as God, universal God. D is the Deuteronomist in the sense the text that is concerned with the Deuteronomy, that is about the second law, where it tells that if you obey, you will be blessed. If you don't obey, you will be cursed. That's the Deuteronomistic theology. And the texts that have this particular gist is called D. And the fourth one is P. P is priestly. Like they identify some priestly characters, like repetitions, a kind of ritualism. So those texts are called priestly texts, especially the texts that handle cleanliness or purity, ritualism. They are named as P texts. So according to the scholars, this particular first narrative is a P tradition because there is a ritual in the sense. Yes. The first day, second day, third day. So it's the same thing is going on. So that kind of ritualistic repetition is there. And on account of this, people say this is a P tradition. And here, if we understand the name of God, God is presented as somebody who is transcendental. Transcendental means somebody who is out of this world, like somebody who is from outside, he controls the entire world. Like from there, he says, and something else comes to be. So that is a transcendental God. But this also reflects the early conception of the world. Like this is how people thought of the world. And scholars also have found that this has a lot of similarity with the Sumerio-Akkadian myth that's called Enuma Elish. Then there is a question of creation out of nothing. That is by Saint Augustine, whose feast we celebrate today. Saint Augustine raises the question, like in the beginning, God created the world, or in the beginning, when God created the world. Like both translations are possible. And Augustine says that the creation is always out of nothing, because to make could be out of something, but the particular Genesis 1 also has initiated this problem of creation out of nothing. Now let's look at the creation. This is how the creation takes place. So day 1, day 2, day 3, then 4, 5, 6. So on the top, 1, 2, 3, those days are days of creation proper. In the sense, God really makes. For example, let there be light, and there was light. And then the second one is that like he divides from waters from above to then the third way there is vegetation. But if you look at the parallel 4, 5, 6, like God in a way does not create anything new, but God embellishes. For example, day 1 parallels with day 4. Here earth is created, then the luminaries, the sun, moon, stars are put. Then there is a division between water above and water below. And then we have sea creatures and we have birds in the sky. On the third day, vegetation, that land is created. Then we have human person and all other animals. So like in the first one, like 1, 2, 3, God sets a space or sets a background. Then he embellishes or beautifies the created being. Now the question may ask, the question that's usually asked is, if God created light on the first day, and fourth day he creates sun and moon, from where this light came? Saint Augustine asks this question in his Confessions later when he tries to explain this entire thing. Not only he, many other scholars also argue about this, like from where this light comes. So they try to answer this way. Number one answer is this light is usually the dawn or the twilight, like in the evening when there is no sun, or in the morning when there is no sun, still a kind of light is there. Some try to say that is light. But the more acceptable answer could be, like in earlier times, the sun, moon, stars were worshipped as gods. So the people of Israel counter that in the sense like your own gods, like your god of sun, your god of moon, your god of star, all are subordinate to our God because our God created your gods. And that is one thing. And when saying this, the people of Israel, in fact, if they worship sun and moon and stars, they are again now taken to the Lord. In the sense, they are only created beings. There is someone who is beyond this, that is God. And that is how we need to theologically understand. So the first creation narrative does not answer how the world came to be. But the answer is very simple. So the question is to be changed, like why this world came to be. So this world came to be because we are there to acknowledge the presence of God and worship Him as our Creator. So that is the reason. So we should not ask that how this world came to be created, but why. So when we answer that why, then this particular narrative becomes meaningful to us. And this is how the ancient Near East people thought of their world. So look at the world here. This is how we have the creation narrative also. In the first creation narrative, so their concept of world was this: like the land was flat, but today we say the earth is round. So they thought of earth as a flat, that the earth is standing on some pillars. So they are pillars of the earth. So when these pillars shake, they thought there is earthquake. And they also thought there is an abyss of water, because when we have a bore well or you have a well here, so water also is here. So they believe that water also is there. And in that water, there are some pillars, and on the pillars stands the earth. This is how they understood. Then they called Sheol. Sheol is the place, the dark place where the people go after their death. That's why we bury the dead. Like when somebody is dead, we bury the person, which means when we bury, we actually create an opening to send that person to Sheol. So when the psalmist when talks about from the Sheol I cried out, like in a way it's also a metaphor. So they believe there was a place called Sheol. Then this is here. Then look at the sky here. So this is the firmament. Firmament is the sky proper. And there we have stars, sun, moon. So they are here. And above this firmament there are waters. The waters above the firmament. And here, look here, like there are some windows. These windows, like those people believe that when God opens these windows, we have rainfall. So God opens the windows and God closes the windows. That's how they understood. And when God opens, then waters flow from there. Then above these waters resides God. That is the heaven, the dwelling place of God. So this is the ultimate place where we all look towards to go. This is how the people of Israel understood. And when we understand this landscape, we are able to understand more or less how God creates this, then how God places these objects, sun and moon. Then we come to some elements. So God, the first story he tells, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So the first creation account tells that God created male and female. So this has now raised many doubts in the context of sexual orientations, like transgender. So some people say God did not create male, God did not create female. So male and female, so together, it's like a transgender, so not beyond, something beyond gender, but it's our own concern that we are reading into the text. But in the beginning, God creates human person, male and female. That means that shows the complementarity. Then we have here image and likeness. So what is this image and likeness? So we have different understanding. Some people say it refers to the rational dimension. So our rationality is the image and likeness of God. Some say it is relationality, like our ability to relate with others. This is proposed by Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. And third proposal is that we are made God's counterpart. In the sense, we can interact with God, and that is possible because we are in the image and likeness of God. Some refer to as soul. So this is soul. and God creates or makes. This is again another problem we'll take later. But finally we can say, is it presentational or representational? For example, suppose I say presentational means somebody is there really in God. For example, I murder a person. When I murder a person, if I say that God is present in that person, what do? I kill God. I'm not killing a person. But how do we understand? We don't understand that God's image is in a presentational way, but it is in a representational way. In the sense, God is like a mirror. Like a mirror, suppose my image is there in the mirror. When I break the mirror, I don't break my image or I don't break myself, but I only break the image produced by the mirror. And that's how we understand God's image and likeness is like more or less mirrored in each other. They are represented in each of us, and this is how we understand. Now the question comes like, how do we reconcile the theory of Darwin's or the Darwinism or the Big Bang theory, where from unicellular being we came all into being, or God created? So how does the church understand today? So the church does not negate the Big Bang theory or Darwin's proposal, nor does it accept as it is true or but it's true in the sense, so it tries to, in a way, tell the believers that the book of Genesis does not aim at giving an explanation to how we came to be. Only it tries to make sense of why we are here or why God created us. So that is the purpose for which the book was written, not necessarily to explain. And another thing, when the book of Genesis was written, there was no scientific concept like we have. There was no evolution concept of evolution of science and technology. So people with their own limited vocabulary, they try to make sense of. So similar narratives we have in all literature. For example, in the Rig Veda, we have a kind of portrayal of the creation. And we have in the Holy Quran. So all the scriptures try to make sense or try to say to their believers how we came to be. So all try to express from their own experience with their limited expression. That's how we need to keep in mind. That's number one. First, coming to the second creation narrative, it's very simple. Genesis 2, 5 to 25. This is from J tradition, because this particular narrative calls God as the Lord, Yahweh. Hence presents the anthropomorphic image of God. Like earlier I said, transcendental image of God. Transcendental means somebody who is beyond, who is outside. But anthropomorphic is somewhere immanent. Immanent in the sense, somebody who is part of. So in the second narrative, if you see, God like makes use of his hands like a human person. He takes mud and he forms a person's image. Then he blows into that. So whatever we do as a human person, and later he walks inside the garden and he talks to the human person. So this is how that dialogue happens. But so everything is present in an anthropomorphic way. So now when we have our first and creation narrative like parallel, we can say in the sense the first projects God as transcendent and the second one as immanent. So now there is a complementarity. So at times God is transcendental and another times God is immanent. So this is how we understand God. So the first and creation narratives are not contrary to each other, but in fact they complement each other. So what is missing in one thing is supplemented in the another. So here we'll understand some words. Number one, Ha Adama. Adam is the earth and Adama is from the earth. So the first person is from the earth. And that tells about our relationship to the land. So in fact, like we all are rooted, that our rootedness dimension, on account of that, we think that we all come from this earth and to this earth we return. And second concept is man is a worker. So here, this particular man is put in the garden so that he would take care of it. He would till the garden and make the garden. That's our vocation, we call it. Like each of us has a vocation, be it male or female. We have a vocation on this earth, like we need to till and we need to make it more productive. That's our vocation. And where is Eden? Today, many have asked this and they try to locate somewhere in Iran, Iraq, that Middle East side. So, or try to locate, but often these locations are not possible. And influence of Adapa myths. There is a myth that has influenced the story of Eden. And this earlier we said, like the writers of the books of the Bible were influenced by other literature as well. So that way, this Adapa myth might have influenced the Eden myth or Eden narrative. Then man has a dual responsibility according to this, to till the soil and to abstain from eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So God creates everything, He puts human person, then He puts these trees and tells that you should abide from, these are forbidden, you should abstain from. So here some people ask the question, like, why did God create this tree at all? If he hadn't created, like because he knew that people which when things are forbidden, people will go after that. Or if he had removed this tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the world would be a good place, like we all will be still in the Garden of Eden, enjoying the bliss of the garden. But here we need to understand, like God respects the human person. So it's our God is not a God of determinism or predestination, where everything he fixes, like you be this way, you be that way. No, he gives us freedom. And why human person has freedom, and that is the explanation. For that we have the narrative. So human persons have the means tree is there, and they can still, but still they have to exercise their freedom, and they have to exercise their discretion and have to abstain from that. But unfortunately people yield to that. Then we have creation of woman. From each comes Isha. And here we have, it is not good that the man should be alone, a helper fit for him. So this is how the narrative tells, like the first time there is a negation. In the sense, earlier in the first narrative, God sees as good, the creation. And when man was created and the human beings were created, God sees very good. But now he sees as something not good. That is, a man was alone, and somebody, a helper fit for him, is created. And deep sleep is perpetuated or accelerated by God. And from Adam's rib, the woman is created. So this does not mean that the man has a bone lesser than a woman. It's only a figurative. Figurative in the sense, somebody who is close to the heart of the man is the woman, and somebody who is equal, who is part of it. That's why Adam says, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. So this is how the Hebrew people understood the human person. We have two dimensions, bones and flesh. So bone is a hard dimension, flesh is a soft dimension. So here, suppose in Greek they had different worldview. They would call a human person as flesh and blood. I think this Hebrew worldview is better than, or more holistic than this one, because here there is a hard part, here there is a soft part. So usually the hard part comes from the male sperm, and the soft part comes from the ovaries. This is how the medicine field also they try to explain. Then there is leaving and cleaving. So the text says the man would leave and will cleave to the woman. So both will make a family. So this leaving and cleaving, this already expresses the divine made or divine installed occasion that is called marriage. Then we have two trees, tree of knowledge and tree of good and evil. Then this text also explains why there is male-female attraction, then complementarity in marriage. These all explained. And by God defines this as the ideal marriage. But now today, if you look at our own world, we have polygamy, polyandry. Polygamy is like many wives, here many husbands. Concubinage is like one is officially married and there are concubines. And we have same-sex marriage, male, female. And there are self-marriages, like some people declare in their own social media that they have married their own selves. And later they divorce their own selves, like some self-marriage. Some even try to attempt marriage with the pets. But according to this narrative, all these are aberrations and all these are forbidden and all these are condemned by God, because in all these, life, in the sense that life is not respected or it's only oriented towards sex, that the goal of the creator is not attained. That's why the church is very keen on condemning this. But now, like the church tries to understand the same-sex relations, and this also has created a lot of confusion. And this is the creation of woman according to Fuchs' own painter. Then we go to the third story, the fall story, the problem of evil. So this story, in fact, explains about evil. Why or how the evil come to be. Actually, here evil is taken for granted, and it's a text. The problem of evil is still not settled. Like we still don't know why there is problem of evil at all. Because especially when it comes to the innocent suffering, why should the innocent people suffer? And with even the book of problem, book of Job, book of Ecclesiastes, they suffer with this problem. Why at all there is evil in the world? But that study is called theodicy, where you defend God. Like you say, God is not the originator of evil. But now in the story we have serpent. So here serpent symbolism, let's understand. So from the text, we need to be clear. It is not Satan. So often we think that this God, Satan tempted Eve. Satan didn't tempt. Only the serpent tempts. So why the serpent image is taken? So serpent was primarily a fertile god or fertile god which was worshipped by other people. So in fact, the people of Israel or the writers, when they write the serpent, they have tried to take another element and have tried to demonize that. So it's not that serpent is demon itself, but they demonize. Like for example, one nation does not like the other nation. So the other nation's symbol is taken and demonized. For example, the other nation's food could be taken and could be demonized. So all things are possible. It's like again political. But in other words, serpent also was considered as a wise creature. Wise creature in the sense, serpent knew all the three worlds. Like human person can know only suppose what is on the earth, and he can or she can look up on the sky and see what is on the sky. But the serpent can know what is underworld because it lives under the earth. That's why they thought the serpent was wiser than all creatures. So that's how here the wisdom element also comes in serpent. So on the one hand, this was a representation or the demonization of the foreign god or goddess. On the other hand, the fertility cult. On the other hand, this was considered as a wise. So wiser than all the creatures. And that's why that wisdom is cursed later. Then according to the story, what happens, like the fruit is forbidden and the woman eats the fruit and she gives to the man also eats, and they sin against God. And what happens after that? After effects of the fall are, first one, shame. The shame comes only when you realize that somebody else is looking at you. For example, we wear slippers and go to a mall or a supermarket. Then we look at all other feet. They are all well dressed, shoes and other very good sandals they have. But we have come with our own slippers. Immediately, a sense of shame comes in, which means other people are looking at my feet. So here the same thing happens. Male and female, they lived together. They were naked, but there was no shame. But after the fall, the first kind of a negative feeling that emerges is shame. Then there is guile in the sense like they become from innocence, or they lose their innocence and they become somewhat tricky people, like they try to cheat, other the kind of guile. Thirdly, they search for a scapegoat. So man gets woman as a scapegoat, woman passes the responsibility to the serpent, and they are not able to accept the responsibility. And earlier, God was talking to them in dialogue, but now later he goes to the monologue, which means God also does not talk to them. So that's how the author tries to tell the negative impacts of the fall. So this is by Michelangelo. So we have here, so the serpent. So serpent is here again like a. So the first story is here. So man, woman, they eat fruit. And the second part of the story, they are expelled from the garden. So this expelled from the garden is also again, they in a way feel that they were expelled later, and it's now foretold. Now these stories are to be understood as etiological story. So etiological story is story that explains why this particular thing comes to be. For example, the ancient people have these questions. Why does a woman have pain at childbirth? So they try to create a story. This woman has childbirth because God cursed the woman. And why did God curse the woman? Because something to do with the fall. So they create a story. Then why does the tilling become hard for man? Because man was cursed, that God told that you have to till the earth and the toil will be great. Then why do the snakes crawl? So according to Dante, the paradise lost, paradise regained. So snakes had wings, but after the fall, so snakes becomes a crawling creature. But later, we also like why man has to win the bread and woman has to has desire for man. So all these are they are asked and the answers are given as an etiology from here. So Eve is getting a new name, mother of all. So the first woman has two names. First name is Isha from man. Second name is mother. I think this in fact explains why women are by nature resilient. So women can cope with any suffering. So here, Eve, like they are expelled from the garden. Now Eve has to make a choice, like whether to feel guilty about the entire thing or whether to go back to, but they can't go back. So somehow life has to go on, and Eve begins to take a decision, and that decision brings forth the children. That's called her resilience. Then God clothes humankind, like God does not abandon the human person, and they are expelled from the garden. And in fact, it represents their later Babylonian exile. Then we just quickly run through the sequence of the fall. Genesis 3, vertical fall, that is, they fall from the relationship between God. Then 4 to 11, horizontal fall, like there is there's like human desire to be like God. Everyone wants to be like God. The results are fratricide, like killing of brother engendered by envy, that is Cain kills Abel. Then we have polygamy and retaliation in 4:23 and 24 by Lamech. Then we have titanic lust. Titanic lust means like the angels of God or the creatures of the heaven are getting into relationship with the women of this world. So the great titans, supernatural beings are born, sons of God and daughters of men. Then there are corruption and violence in the earth. Then there is incestual relationship. The Canaan is cursed. Then city with a tower to the heaven. So Babel, the people try to attempt to go towards heaven. But however, the premillennial history runs on two platforms. One is sin and judgment, and other side grace and promise. So on the one hand, people have sinned, God is judging them, but on the other hand, God continues to clothe humanity. So these are the two rails, we can say, on which the entire the book of Genesis is going to run. So one side there will be people's vulnerability, on the other side there will be grace. For example, Abraham. Abraham tries to have his own children, like he thinks that Eleazar would be the heir, and he tries to anticipate God's, but that would be a sin of faithlessness. But still, God is gracious to him. And coming to Jacob, Jacob is very, Jacob cheats his own father, Jacob cheats his brother. But however, there is grace, like God takes care of him and God brings him to Egypt, and later brings his own people to the land of Canaan. This is how the entire Genesis is going to run. So that concludes the first part, that is the primeval history. The second part we will take after the break. So now we are going to see three patriarchs, the patriarchal history. So the first part was primeval history from chapter 12 to chapter D. So here some say it's three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Some say four patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. But since Joseph's story is part of Jacob's cycle, we treat it as three patriarchs, called of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when we compare the narratives, Abraham and Jacob, they are dedicated a lot of portions. Only Isaac is only it's a transit person. The entire creation of the world and humans are given just in 2 chapters, but story of Abraham is given about 15 chapters. So this in fact tells like how this particular person, Abraham, is going to make a great impact. Now some people may ask why the story focuses on Abraham. The story focuses on Abraham because the Hebrew Bible is the book of the Jews. For Jews, Abraham is the important person because from Abraham is from there, they attribute their beginning to Abraham. And later, the book religions like Islam and Christianity, they also have Abraham. So Abraham, in fact, unites three religions: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And Abraham is the key person that way. From his age 75, so the Bible does not narrate about his birth and childhood, but only from age of 75 to 175. So about 100 years of time that we are going to see now. And how does God call one person out of anonymity and use that life to challenge and change the world? God challenges, in fact, through a model for faithfulness. So this is how we can summarize the entire story of Abraham into one expression. Like in Genesis 1 to 11, we all had models of unfaithfulness, like our first parents, Cain, and the later persons who were trying to be like God. But now from 12 on, that is the Abraham cycle, we have models faithfulness. So God is, Abraham is behaving, or Abraham is going to become a person of faith, and Abraham shows his faithfulness. Earlier in 11:4, we have, let us make a name for ourselves. The people at Babel were telling, but now God is telling Abraham, I will make your name great. So this is not like when we try to make our name great, often that becomes a failure. And later, Abraham's name is made greater. So this we can say, like when we the first 11 chapters, they have like people have master plan, like Adam and Eve, they have a master plan to be like God. Then later, Cain has a master plan. Then Lamech has a master plan. But these master plans always fail. But only master's plan is fulfilled, or master's plan succeeds. And the master's plan comes from Abraham. Now we have the theme of promise here. Three things are promised. So God is promising him a blessing, that you will be a blessing to the nation. Then you will be given land. Then you will have an offspring. So these three are promised to Abraham when he was 75. Now the historians have tried to situate Abraham in history, like where or any other records are being found about Abraham. And archaeological discoveries, like more or less people try to say like Abraham might have lived in a Iron Age, or the pre-Neolithic age, like just before Iron Age. This is how we understand. But now, whether he was a literal person or literary person, like literal means really existed in time, existed in space, or literary, like created, that is said, like we can't say, because if we have to say that that person really existed, only we have from records from 931 BC, that is just after Solomon. And before that, we don't have any historical record. So from that point of view, we can say that Abraham was not a literal person, but a literary person. In the sense, a person who lives in the literature. But that does not deny that that person had an existence. But this is a really faith expression. So from that point of view, we need to understand. So faith comes like it's a different realm than history. This is how we answer this question. So there are some narratives which are important in Abraham. So first one is Abraham and Melchizedek. So again, this is an etiological story. So earlier I said etiological story is a story that explains why certain thing came to be. So this story is created to tell why people have to give tithe. Tithe means 1/10. So people have to give 1/10 of their salary, or 1/10 of their produce, or 1/10 of everything. So here, Melchizedek is a king of Salem. So Jerusalem, they call it Shalom or Jerusalem. He offers to Abraham, who returns from battle, bread and wine, and that foreshadows Eucharist. And Abraham in turn gives 1/10 to Melchizedek. So what does it imply? If Abraham, the first patriarch, has given 1/10, we all have to give 1/10. So that is how this particular giving of tithe emerges, and this could be an etiological story. And we have here El Elyon, El Shaddai. So these are El epithets, like related titles related to God. This we dealt with in our previous lecture. Then from Melchizedek, we have a very good impact in the New Testament, where the letter to the Hebrews portrays Jesus as the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. So Jesus is presented as high priest. Usually, the high priest was coming down from Aaron's family. Aaron belonged to Levi clan or tribe. So Jesus belongs to Judah tribe. So now the later priests, like we are priests and the priests in the entire history of the church, and we can become priests only because of this. In the sense, letter to the Hebrews present Jesus as the high priest in the order of Melchizedek, not in the order of Aaron. And he goes further in the sense Melchizedek has no beginning, no end. From nowhere he comes, to nowhere he goes. And that way, like God or Jesus also had no beginning, no end. And based on this, the letter to the Hebrews present Jesus as the high priest. That is inspired from here. Then coming to Abraham's cycle proper, we have these 5 events. Number 1, covenant with Abraham, then Hagar and Ishmael, Abraham's hospitality and prayer, sacrifice of Isaac, then first piece of land, like Abraham possesses the first piece. Now let's understand these 5. Number 1, covenant with Abraham. Earlier I said covenant is a relationship, but this covenant was developed later. But here, through the principle of retrojection, in the sense the author is presenting that God made a covenant with Abraham. So prior to this, we have another covenant with Noah. So here now from covenant with Noah, covenant with Abraham. So what is the major difference? So you could read Genesis 15. Here, God takes the initiative. So the initiative is always from God. And the covenant, when they execute a covenant, this happens that way, like they ratify the covenant. For example, there is one party, 2 parties are involved in making a covenant, and they offer some or they cut some animals or birds. So here, God is telling to cut some animals and keep. And what happens in the evening? God walks in between. So what is the symbolism or what is the meaning of symbol is like, if I don't abide by this covenant, I also will be torn like these animals and I will be killed. Which means God takes initiative to be faithful to the covenant. But very beautifully, Abraham does not walk across, which means God is making an unconditional covenant. So however Abraham is, God will remain faithful to him. So that is the story. So in the Bible, we have both conditional covenant and unconditional covenant. For example, Noah covenant is conditional in the sense people also have to obey later God, or people also have to be very good. They should not have any evil inclinations in their heart. So that is Noah covenant. But coming to Abrahamic covenant is unconditional. Later, suppose we take covenant on Mount Sinai, that is conditional because people have to abide by the Decalogue, the 10 commandments. But coming to Davidic covenant with David, that is unconditional. Like God is faithful to the house of David always. So when we think of Abrahamic covenant, we need to remember that is unconditional covenant. Then second major story is Hagar and Ishmael. So here we have like the first Eliezer, like Abraham is promised a son, but Abraham is getting old. So Abraham, in fact, hastens in the sense he tries to anticipate. Number one, he thinks that Eliezer, his servant is there, and servant could be his own adopted son. And that's what is meant by, so oftentimes we think this is the voice of God, this is the voice of God. Like we really negate the voice of God, but we try to attribute. So Abraham also has that problem. The second time he is not faithful in the sense he takes about the word of Sarah, he takes Hagar. This is like a surrogate motherhood. Like surrogate motherhood is Hagar, in fact, gives her womb so that Abraham get a child. So this was also a custom in the ancient Near East. Like people can, like instead of wife, they could have a relationship with somebody else who is taking the place of wife and will beget children. And that principle. But here Hagar is taken, but God also rejects Ishmael. But from Ishmael, God thinks another thing. So here in the Hagar and Ishmael story, we have a very beautiful insight where Hagar is sent out, or in a way expelled from the house of Abraham, and there she encounters God. So she beautifully tells in the desert that I have seen the one who sees me, that El Roi, that particular, in the sense, God sees me. So that concept is very well brought by Hagar. So it's a real God experience. And this also tells us that God experience can happen even in a desert place, like a Hagar experienced. Third great event is Abraham's hospitality and prayer. Hospitality was considered as a great virtue, and Abraham waits at his door that somebody would pass by, and three persons pass by, and he invites them. And at the end of the dinner, they say that they next time, next spring when they come, Abraham will have a son. And Sarah laughs. And one of the persons say, why did you laugh? And Sarah tells that I didn't laugh. But the angel of the Lord tells that, no, you really laughed. So from there comes Isaac. Isaac means he laughs. And later we have in Genesis 18, Abraham prays for Sodom because God was about to destroy Sodom because of its sin of homosexuality. Then in Genesis 22, we have sacrifice of Isaac, where really we have an evidence for Abraham's faith, because Abraham knew that if son Isaac is killed, it's not that his own son will be killed, but God's promise is killed. I think Abraham was able to believe that God will never abandon him, or God will never betray his own covenant, or betray his own promise. And here, from our spiritual point of view, we can say like Abraham was taking Isaac on the mountain this side, and on the other side of the mountain, like God was taking a ram, like taking a sheep to be slaughtered. And which means oftentimes we think like we see the one side of the mountain, like Abraham might have been really suffering, or Abraham might have his own conflict whether to take the son or not to take the son, but still he obeys. But Abraham was able to see what is beyond the mountain. So the faith is simply to see something beyond. At times in our own life, we think only one side. Okay, I am suffering, I am struggling, I am far from home, and I have this problem, that problem. But something is happening on the other side, and that only God can see. And when we have faith vision, we are able to see that. Then in Genesis 23, Abraham buys the first piece of land. And the story is very beautiful. Like Abraham has everything. Like Abraham has cattle, Abraham has many servants, and Abraham has a very big family, but still he does not have a land. Because in ancient times, owning a land would be like getting rooted in that place. So usually a foreigner comes, a foreigner will be allowed to stay as long as that person wishes. But owning a land is very, very difficult. Even today in many countries, it's like that the policy is like that. The migrants, the foreigners can never own the land, because land means rootedness. So here, what people say, the people of Canaan, they say, they say to Abraham, you are a great leader and God is with you and God has multiplied you. We accept everything. So what we say, we give a piece of land, like you, whatever you want to use, you use. But Abraham buys the land, which means the promised land was not given as a freebie, but it was purchased, which means so what is something beautiful from God does not come as a gift. Like God does not give the promised land on a platter. You take it, you take it. No, it has to be earned. It has to be worked out, and people have to contribute. So Abraham becomes a person who labored for that promised land. And here also we understand the value of labor, human labor. So it's not like Abraham received. Abraham was not receiving it. So when we labor, we don't let ourselves be in the receiving end. So people give money because we have labored for it. They are compensating our labor. So that way, that Abraham's self-esteem also could be understood from this particular narrative. On the one hand, promised land was not given on a platter. On the other hand, the Abraham also was a person of self-esteem, that we would not go for freebies, but also he would earn. And there's something beautiful happens. Abraham becomes rooted, and that rootedness comes only at the death of Sarah, his own wife. Sarah dies, and to bury that particular thing, people had to buy, Abraham had to buy land. And another beautiful insight we can get is the first promised land was a tomb, was a cemetery. It means, in a way, it also tells about like our own rootedness. Like we come from the earth, and to the earth we would return. And that promised land is our own. Like it tells about our beginning and it tells about our end. I think I view the Bible's view this like why the tomb has to be purchased first, because people have to, like, we have our own ultimate destination is that tomb, and through which we enter into the presence of God. That is today with the Abraham cycle. Now we go to the second cycle, that is Isaac cycle. I would like to explain the concept of type scene. So through this, let's understand the Isaac cycle. So what is this type scene? So type scene is a literary term in this, it's very simple. So type scene means same pattern occurs again and again. So from the pattern, we can very well say that something is going to come. Okay, let me take occasion story. So for example, Moses is called, Jeremiah is called, and then Isaiah is called, Mary is called. So these calling stories are called occasion stories in the Bible. The occasion stories have a pattern. Pattern in the sense, there is a problem. Number one, God invites somebody to solve that problem. Third one, that person shows hesitation. Then God gives a sign. Then that person accepts. So these are 5 elements. There is a problem. God invites somebody. The person who is invited has a little problem or hesitation. Then God gives an assurance or a sign. Then the person accepts. Let's take Moses. What is the problem? People are in slavery. So who is called? Moses is called. And Moses hesitates. No, I am a stammerer. I can't talk. Or it sends somebody else. So this all hesitation. Then what God says? He gives 2 signs. Like you put your hand in the cassock and you take it out, that will become leprous. Then you throw the rod on the floor, then it becomes a serpent. This is a sign. Then Moses accepts. That's one. Then Jeremiah. Mary, let's take Mary. So there is a problem. What is the problem? The redemption, salvation of humankind. Okay. Then who is called? Mary is called. And what is the hesitation? Mary tells, no, I don't know husband, like I don't know man. How can this be? It's a hesitation. But then what happens? God gives a sign. What is the sign? Like your own kin, that is Elizabeth, is barren. And that's a sign. Immediately what nothing will be impossible for God. And immediately Mary tells, behold, the handmaid of the Lord. So like when this is another type scene. Type scene in the sense, same pattern is followed. So the occasion story is a type scene, which means like from that we didn't understand from literary point of view, like Moses was called, but not according to, like it's the way of presenting. And marriage is a type scene. So marriage at the well. So in the Bible, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, whenever people are near the well, we can be 100% sure that there is going to be a wedding. Why well is considered to be a wedding place? 2 reasons. Number one, well refers to fertility. Like people were living in a Palestine was a arid land, desert land. So in the desert land, something where fertility is there, is water is there, is well. So well was considered as a place of fertility. So people come there, I mean that represent like people have life, because in the rest of the land they have death, but only at the well they have life. That's one. That's a one way of understanding. Second one, the well, like people would gather, like a social media. Today we have Twitter, Instagram, like people gather and share opinion. So in ancient times, like even in our own villages, earlier times, like where women gather at the well, there will be lot of gossip or lot of information passed, and men who gather there, they will talk about business or they will settle accounts. So this all things would happen either at the well or at the gate. So usually women gather at the well and men gather at the gate. So the second one is, it's a place where people get to know each other. That is a well. So here, according to this type scene, what happens? A man journeys to a distant land. He encounters a woman who has come to a well. Then she is a member of his family. Then water is drawn from the well. And the young woman rushes home to tell her family about the man's arrival. Man is invited for a meal, and betrothal is concluded between the man and the young woman. So these are the elements. First one, a man journeys. So here in the story of Isaac's wedding, Abraham's servant journeys. Then Moses journeys. Jesus journeys. Then there they encounter a woman. For example, Abraham's servant encounters Rebecca, Moses encounters his wife, then Jesus encountered Samaritan woman. Then there is a dialogue, and there is here even Jesus and Samaritan woman, we can say, like Samaritans are of extended family of the Jews. Then water is drawn from the well, and the woman rushes. So here Samaritan woman also rushes to the village and tells that, come and see the man who has told about everything about me. Then there is a meal. So here the disciples in fact bring food. Then there is a betrothal. Like here, Isaac is betrothed to Rebecca. Then Moses is betrothed to Jethro's daughter. And this is how the story is concluded. This is called a type scene. So we have Isaac and Rebecca, Jacob and Rachel, Moses and Zipporah, Boaz and Ruth, Saul and Israel, Jesus and Samaritan woman. All these people are getting to know each other only at the well. So here the person who has come to look for Rebecca tells that this thing comes from the Lord. Again, we see how the faith vision of the master affects the servant also. So the servant of Abraham also has a faith vision. Good. That concludes Isaac's cycle, because the Isaac cycle is part of that Abraham cycle, only one. Then we go to the last one, Jacob's cycle. This we can divide into four. Number one, need for transformation, preparation for transformation, transformation, results of transformation. So need for transformation means like Jacob is there, and the beauty of Jacob's story is like only story or only the personage that is described from birth to death is Jacob. We have others like Samson is there. Okay, Samson's birth is there. Samson's childhood is there. Samson's boyhood is there. Samson's youth is there. Samson's marriage is there. But Samson's old age is not there, because Samson just dies young. But coming to Jacob, Jacob's birth is there. Childhood, boyhood, young, youth, marriage, then later old age. The entire his own life is mentioned. So Jacob is very, very unique. So when we have time, we could just run through the Jacob cycle and try to see at what life stage we are. We have some lesson from Jacob, because Jacob has gone through all our life stages. In the first stage of his life, he was in need of transformation, because he cheated his own father and he cheated his own brother. Then he prepared for transformation. That happens on the way to Laban's house and later from Laban's house. Then there is transformation, like he encounters God or God's angel and he fights. Then finally, there are results of transformation. He becomes a calm person. Now let's take two texts from this cycle and try to see. So here we have Jacob at Bethel. This story, this is the first vision. So here, the first, according to the author, Jacob is running away from Rebecca's house, which means Rebecca tells that your brother tries to kill you, so you escape from here. And Jacob travels here. According to the text, Jacob takes a stone and lies over it. So which means this particular stone, in fact, reflects the guilt that was inside. So it's not the hardness of the stone, is the author is referring in fact to the guilt and fear. So on the one hand, he was guilty, like he has cheated his own father and his own brother. And on the other hand, he had fear that he would be killed. So fear and guilt become stone on which he is lying. And the second beautiful element is, for the first time in his life, Jacob is alone. In mother's womb, he was with his brother, twin, Esau. And father's house, he was with father, mother, brother. But now, for the first time in his life, he is lonely or he is alone. So, the moment of his negative feelings and the moment of his loneliness, this moment becomes the moment of God experience. And he sees like ladder going to heaven and angels of God going up and going down. And this is the first dream. And after this, in fact, he makes covenant with Yahweh and calls this place as Bethel. Really, God is there. So Bethel, Beth means house, El means God, house of God. So from here, what do we learn? We learn only when we have our own guilt and fear, or our own ill feelings, or only when we have our own loneliness in life, that we need not regret over them, but that becomes a moment of God experience for them. That's the first story or first vision. The second one, he returns now from Laban's house, and he is now about to encounter Esau. So people are telling that your brother Esau may kill you. But now Jacob undergoes a struggle. So now Jacob is alone, and his wives and his servants and his cattle, his sons and daughter, all are there around. And he comes alone, and an angel of the Lord or somebody appears, and that person fights the entire night. And in the morning, Jacob wins, and Jacob tells, I won't let you go unless you bless me. And the person blesses and gives a name, Israel. So Jacob becomes Israel, new identity. So often scholars say like this was an external fight. But later now they say the struggle was happening inside Jacob. Inside Jacob, in the sense, Jacob was struggling for integrity. Integrity in the sense whether to plan something and cheat his own brother, or to accept him or to surrender to him. And finally, he surrenders. In the sense, he comes out as a person of integrity, and the sign is there, the person becomes vulnerable. So from this part of the story, Jacob will be a limping person. Jacob will not be able to walk straight. He'll be limping all along. That is a sign of vulnerability. But Jacob chooses to be a person of integrity. And that's the beauty of story. So these two stories, story at Bethel and story at Penuel, these two give us in fact a lot of life lessons, like how we need to come out as persons of integrity. That's the second cycle. Now coming to Joseph's cycle. So Joseph's cycle, like we understand differently, Joseph and his brothers, they sell Joseph. Then from a slave, he becomes a prince, and he forgives his brothers. This is how the story ends. So this story is called often as a novella. Novella in the sense, somebody who comes like from a poor person, somebody becomes a hero. That's a novella. That is actually like a human aspiration. Like somebody, a poor person, always dreams of becoming a rich person. And that happens only in stories oftentimes. Many times it doesn't happen in real life. So here, let's take some elements from here. Number one, dreams. So then Joseph's cycle, we have 6 dreams. So earlier Jacob didn't have a dream. He had vision. So vision is different from dream, because vision is something that happens in front of me, but dream is that happens within me. So we have 6 dreams. The first 2, Joseph's dreams when he was in father's house. Then servants' dreams when Joseph was in prison. Then Pharaoh's dreams, 2. So why we have 2 dreams? Like why shouldn't we have only one? In the Bible, a duplication means confirmation. So for example, Joseph has one dream, like the star, moon. Then again he has the dream of sheep. And here that cupbearer has one, and the bread maker, that is another dream. Then Pharaoh also has 2 dreams related to the famine that's going to come on Egypt. So here, when the dreams are duplicated, doubled, it simply means confirmation. So this is what is said even in Celtic tradition, as Paulo Coelho tells, like if you go to a person's house once, you may not go again. But if you go to a person's house twice, the second time, it's always understood that you will go again. Same thing can happen. If you go to a country for the first time, you would not go to that country again. But if you go to the country again, second time, it is 100% sure that you'll be going to that country again and again. Because the second always means that it's confirmed. So Joseph's dreams are confirmed servants, and this is a confirmation. It's a one element we can learn. Then the second one is victim or master. So now Joseph is sold and he's in Potiphar's house. And the first encounter we have Potiphar's wife. Potiphar is according to the biblical text, Sar. Sar could mean officer or he could mean a eunuch. So maybe Potiphar might have been a transgender eunuch, like impossible to have sexual relationship. And that's how Potiphar's wife might have had eye on Joseph. But now Joseph does not exploit the situation. What he tells beautifully, that's a faith vision of Joseph. He tells, how can I sin against the Lord? Like, how can I do this evil thing in the eyes of the Lord and sin against him? So he could very well say, like, he could very well make use of the opportunity. How, like, he pleases the wife of Potiphar, and the wife is pleased now. The pleased wife, she will refer to the wife, husband, and Potiphar will give a good place to Joseph, and like that way he could climb the ladder. But Joseph never attempted to do that way. Joseph tells that, how can I do which is something evil in the sight of the Lord? And I always wonder, a person who was victimized, how that person, instead of acting out of anger, acts out of God's vision. And that's the beauty. Like Joseph was never a victim of his situation. He was only a master. So he knew, okay, I will not do this. And he held on to that. And later he survives. And often the scholars refer this like Eve was yielding to a temptation. There is a counterpart. Joseph does not yield to temptation. The first parents were running after a forbidden fruit, but Joseph tries to rectify that. Like through our freedom, we can always say no to people or no to temptation. And that's a beautiful second lesson from Joseph. Then third one, making connections. So we can learn from Joseph how he makes connections. Like he's in prison, and again he's not playing a victim. Oh, God punished me, or I was good to that, and I am in a prison. Suppose if I were to yield to the temptation, I would be better. Nothing of grumbling, nothing of anger, but rather he begins to make connection. So he makes connection not with those who are under him, inferior to him, but he makes connections with the people who are above him. Two persons he finds. Number one, a cupbearer, like one who will pour wine for Pharaoh, and another one, a baker, like a royal court chef. So he makes connections with the people who are above, so that they would make a reference to them. So often in our own life, we are keen on making connections to the people who are inferior to us, but those connections don't work at all. Only when we make connections with the upward, we also grow. In family relationship or in a business, we always need to have vertical connection. The vertical refers to somebody who are above, and Joseph was able to make connection. Then Joseph took charge of his life. Like every moment he chose what he was going to do and what would be the impact, and then he was very clear about that. That is taking charge of life. Like how often we don't take charge of our life, just we go by like the whims and fancies or by emotions. So that we don't reason out often, but Joseph gives us a very good learning for taking charge of our life. My life is my responsibility. That's a beautiful lesson. Then he has also good strategic planning, in the sense like Pharaoh is discussing with Joseph, like how Joseph is appointed as the governor. And immediately Joseph proposes, like what is the proposal? Let us all cultivate for these 7 years and have godowns in different places, and may Pharaoh take the possession of everything. And he involves Pharaoh, and that is his strategic planning. And he was also an intelligent person. Then finally, no turning back. That happens, like his own brothers come and his own brothers are there, but Joseph never turned back to his life. If he turned back to his life, he would have retaliated. Like how you made me suffer in a foreign land where I didn't know any new language, new food habit, new culture. So you made me undergo all these sufferings. So you would have retaliated, but he never retaliated. He never turned back in his life at all. That was something beautiful. Then the theme of recognition. So Joseph was able to recognize, and Jacob was able to recognize the garment. And in Judah Tamar narrative, Judah and Tamar, Judah recognized the coat that she left with Tamar. This is a recognition. But the brothers were not able to recognize Joseph. Later only it is reconciled. Then there is a theme of homecoming, like all come home. Like Joseph is there, Joseph brings his own people, his own brothers, then father is brought, and there is a reunion. So in our life also, there is always a moment of homecoming. That's what said by Martin Heidegger, a philosopher. He tells at a certain moment of time, we need to come home. The prodigal son, the son comes home. That becomes a moment of celebration. And here, this is also setting a ground for what is going to come. In the sense, the next Pharaoh will come, when we will not know Joseph, but the things will change. But still God holds the hand. And Jacob visits Joseph, and now Jacob also meets Pharaoh, and there's a beautiful dialogue between Pharaoh and Jacob. And Pharaoh asks, like, how old are you? He tells, I'm 120 years old, but compared to my own predecessors, my own patriarchs, it's nothing, but all filled with some kind of suffering. So at the end of his life, he feels that whatever maybe that suffering could be the loss of Joseph, or that suffering could be like his own guilt about cheating his own father, his own brother, we are not sure. But however, Jacob was vulnerable. The final story, the story ends like this. You sold me, but God sent me. So this is a faith vision of Joseph. Joseph tells his brothers, like, you don't worry because you sold me, but God sent me. So this could be our own life. Like suppose because of a family circumstance, we are in a foreign land, we are working or we are undergoing different problems. But there, that God, we may think that the family has sold us. No, we always need to think that God has sent us. Then God changed for good. So whatever he tells that whatever bad you intended, God changed for good. Later he asks, am I equal to God? But earlier narratives, you remember, Tower of Babel, they wanted to become like God. And Eve and Adam, they wanted to become like God. But Joseph is telling, am I equal to God? Joseph undoes all that has been done in Genesis 1 to 11. The last slide is this. Like, what is the hermeneutical significance, which means how does it give message to us? The Joseph story is not its claim about the universality of God's intervention in human affairs to bring good out of evil. So we need to remember that whenever there evil, God will come. So the story does not say that. Sometimes evil is transformed, sometimes not. For example, Job. Job suffers, God interferes and restores 2 times. But this does not happen always. Sometimes God intervenes, sometimes not. Sometimes God provides a ram, sometimes not. So what is given is what the Joseph story accomplishes is the hope rather than a guarantee that good may emerge from evil. However, one thing is giving us hope always, that Joseph concludes the story saying that God will visit you, and that God's visit happens at the Exodus event when Moses takes the leadership. He comes and Moses liberates the people of Israel from Egypt. That's how the story ends, with a ray of hope that God will visit us. So the primeval history, God created us. In the patriarchal history, God promised to us. And as the story ends, it tells that God will visit us. So we also thank God that he has created us, and he continues to give promises to us, and he constantly visits us. So this could be our takeaway from the lesson of today. Good. So here I conclude.